Today's daf is daf Yud Gimel in Masechet Yoma, and we're going to start 5 lines down from the top of the Amud. The Mishnah tells us that Rabbi Yehuda Omer Af Isha Cheres Maskinan Lo, that it's not enough to set up a substitute Kohen Gadol to cover an event that the first Kohen Gadol contaminates himself and cannot do the avodah. And that's not sufficient because we need a second string wife for the Kohen Gadol, because the Torah sets up the precondition for the Kohen Gadol to serve on Yom Kippurim that he has to have beso and he has to have a wife. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says, let's be consistent to the same extent that you organize a second string Kohen Gadol, an event that the first becomes disqualified. So too, you should set up a second string wife for the Kohen Gadol in an event that the Kohen Gadol loses his wife. For Abonanami Hachaishi Lishma. What about the Chachamim? They deny the possibility that the Kohen Gadol's wife might die. How could they do so? And how do you reconcile the fact that they are afraid that the Kohen Gadol might contract tumah, and they're not afraid that the Kohen Gadol's wife will die? Amri l'cha Rabbana, the Rabbana would say in defense that there's no inconsistency here. Why? Because tuma shchicha, misa lo shchicha. It's foreseeable that the Kohen Gadol might contract tumah, and we have to cover that possibility by organizing a second string Kohen Gadol. However, it's uncommon that the Kohen Gadol's wife would die. So the Gemara now turns back to Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda now is on defensive. Rabbi Yehuda is going to have to say that even Misa is shchicha. Amru loim kain ein l'davar sof. Now, what's happening here is Rabbi Yehuda is getting really smashed. And the argument, the contention against Rabbi Yehuda's position that's presented here by the Rabbanan is in Kain Ein L'Davar Sof. Meaning, if you're worried about the possibility that the Kohen Gadol might lose his wife, which according to the Rabbanan is lo shchichi, then you should worry about the possibility that the Kohen Gadol might lose both wives, even the second wife. Shapir ka'omar le Rabbi Yehuda. How would Rabbi Yehuda defend himself against the argument of the Rabbanan? Rabbi Yehuda omar lechada chayshin, lemisa dechada chayshin, lemisa detarte lo chayshin. Just like you said, Rabbanan, that one misa is not shchiach, and we don't have to worry about that possibility. I would go a step further, says Rabbi Yehuda, and I would apply the lo chayshinon not to the death of the first wife, but maybe if you want to go a step further and consider the possibility of the death of the second wife, that both women will die, that's lo shchicha. For Rabbanan, how do Rabbanan respond to that argument of Rabbi Yehuda that seems solid and logical? Once you're considering something that's unlikely, it's lo shchicha. You're worried about that way out possibility that his wife might die, and therefore you set up a second string wife. You're already entering into the area of lo shchicha. You're going to have to be consistent, and you're going to have to apply that principle one step further, that maybe his second wife likewise will die. And then we're back to Ein L'Davar Sof. Like the Gemara, for example, in Pesachim says that when you're doing B'dikas Chametz and you cleaned out one room and now you turn your back, maybe as you're going to the next room, on the way, before you get to do the B'dika on room number 2, the weasel might come and bring Chametz from room number 2, which hasn't been checked yet, into room number 1, which you checked. And the Mishnah applies the principle of Imkain Ein L'Davar Sof. When you're chash, you're concerned about a possibility that might arise on the horizon, will then undermine the entire enterprise that you're trying to initiate, then we don't apply, let's be choshesh for an outside possibility. Now the Gemara says the following: is there a certain inconsistency in the approach of the Rabbanan? For Rabbanan, Nemru inu l'nafshayu, the Rabbanan should consider the same objection that they raised against Rabbi Yehuda against themselves. It's reflective as well, because if you're choshesh for one wife dying, then ein l'davar sof. What about you? The Rabbanan say that we have to be choshesh that the first Kohen Gadol will contract tumah, and that's a serious possibility. That's called shchicha. Well, why not say that the second string Kohen Gadol might likewise be contaminated with tumah? And again, you're in the old quagmire of ein l'davar sof. So the Gemara says that Amri Lach Rabbanan, the Rabbanan will defend themselves by applying the following principle. We have a principle called Kohanim Zrizim. They're very meticulous. And in the case of the Kohen Gadol, Zorisu, he's very careful, and he would not contaminate tumah. He would not be, we don't assume that he'll be contaminated. So the Gemara says, if that be the case, Zoris, who, if you're applying the principle of Zrizus, is Lovan Saknin and Kohen Acher. Apparently, you are afraid that maybe, despite his Zrizus, he may be a little bit careless, walk into a room or a house where there's a corpse, and it'll contract tumah. If that be the case, then again, why not have the same chash with regard to the second Kohen Gadol? Gemara answers, Keva davdina leit Sarah, kolshkein dimizdares tfei. A very brilliant move here on the part of the Gemara to explain the Rabbanan. And the Gemara is now turning it around and saying that appointing a second string Kohen Gadol will serve the purpose of encouraging the Kohen Gadol to be as zariz as he can, and not to allow himself to go into a place that might possibly have tumah. Because if he does, he's going to have to be removed, and he's going to be jealous when they appoint a second Kohen Gadol to replace him. And we've seen the nature of this logic in the previous sugya that we learned with regard to a Kohen Gadol who was replaced by a second string Kohen Gadol. And there's a certain amount of enmity in an event that when the Kohen Gadol Rishon goes back to his office, now he has to worry about the Kohen Gadol Sheni, that he could still function and operate as a Kohen Gadol. And here too, because of this sort of social pressure and a little envy here with competition, the Kohen Gadol would be particularly meticulous and avoid any possible contamination, just in order to make sure that this second string Kohen Gadol will not replace him. No one wants to be replaceable. The Gemara asks the following kasha now. Umi sagile bitakanta. Will it actually solve your problem by making this takana that you have appointed a second wife for the Kohen Gadol in event that his first wife would die? Mi sagile bitakanta beso amrachman of a high love beso. You've established and appointed a second wife. She's waiting in the bullpen in the event that the Kohen Gadol's first wife dies. Well, what's going to happen if his first wife dies? He's not married to the second wife, is he? And therefore, it's still not beso, and you haven't solved your problem. The Kohen Gadol won't be able to do the avoda. And here the Rishonim ask, well, why can't he marry her on Yom Kippur itself if the event arouses in an event that the Kohen Gadol Rishon, the Isha Rishona dies? He's got another wife waiting in the wings. He'll now marry her. And one answer is that you're not allowed to marry a woman on Shabbos or on Yom Kippur. That comes under the general takon at the end of Masechet Beitza, that we don't write documents and we don't make kinyanim, we don't enter into any transactions. We're always afraid that maybe some chil Shabbos will happen and they'll write it up. And the Ritva adds another svara. He said that the Gemara is worried that if he doesn't marry her, then let's say his first wife dies in the middle of the avodah. He can marry her at that moment in order to implement the balance of the avodah, but the problem is going to be that that avodah that he was involved in now becomes disqualified, because midway through the avodah he has no wife, and the Kohen Gadol will not be able to complete that avodah. And therefore, the Gemara suggests the Makadesh law that even on Erev Yom Kippur, he actually marries the second wife. So the Gemara asks the following question, raises the following objection: V'akama delo kanis la lav beisohi. The Torah says that the Kohen Gadol has to have a bias. And there are two stages in marriage. There's Kiddushin, otherwise known as Erisin, and there's Nesuin, which is effectuated by Chuppah. And up until Nesuin, she's not Besa. So don't tell me it's enough that on Erev Yom Kippur was Mekadesh. And the Gemara answers the Kanisla. He actually takes the second wife into the Chuppah on Erev Yom Kippur. She is now fully married to him with not only Erisin, but with Nesuin, and therefore she's based on the Kohen Gadol. Even in an event that Chalila, he loses his first wife, he still has a wife. But everything seems to fit into place, perfect puzzle, except for one problem that the Gemara raises. We are facing a very complicated situation, almost an absolute brick wall, like in a maze where you can't find your way out. Why? Because in Kain Havilei Shnei Batim, Brachmana Omer v'chiper bi'ado u'bi'ad beso v'lo bi'ad Shnei Batim. A Kohen Gadol has to be married to one wife and not two wives, because the Torah says beso in the singular, implying one wife, to the exclusion of two. Now, if you're going to say because of the fear that lest his wife, his first wife, his only wife, would die on Yom Kippur, he won't have the possibility of completing his avodah, therefore he has to marry two wives. Well, if he marries two wives, then he's not going to be able to function as a Kohen Gadol because he's got two batim, and that itself disqualifies him. So we're really in a bind here because he can't be without a wife, and therefore in case, and we worry about the possibility of his wife dying, he'll be left without a wife. On the other hand, to fill in the gap, and we have to do this on Erev Yom Kippur, we have to marry him off to a second wife, but now he has two batim. How do we establish a case where he has one wife and not two wives? And we're afraid that his wife may die. The Gemara answers, the Hadar Megarishla. He marries her and then he divorces her. Again, this is just a lead-in to the next piece of Gemara, because that statement of the Gemara makes no sense. He megarishla hadra kushal educhtin. There's no takana if he's being megarisha. What did he gain by marrying her and divorcing her on Erev Yom Kippur? We're still stuck with the possibility that since he only has one wife, she might die. Well, tricha de megarishla altna. And here we're at the gateway, the entranceway into a brand new sugya of how a man can organize a marriage with a second wife in such a way that if his first wife dies, then the marriage to the second wife is valid, so he has a beso. And in event that she doesn't die, the second wife is actually divorced, so therefore he doesn't have Shnei Batim. And the Gemara is going to go through a whole slew of different possible arrangements, the goal of which is to guarantee that he has one wife and not two wives, but he'll always have one wife. So the Gemara says the Omar law, he says to her, which I assume is the second string wife, Reza Gitech Almanas Shetamusi. This get is valid if you will die, meaning die before the end of Yom Kippur. What does he gain by this Tanai of Areza Gitech Almanas Shetamusi? And the Mefarshim say the following. This get that he's giving to the second wife will be valid only if she dies. Now, when she dies, then the get is chal lemafreya retroactively, and he was never married to her. That's the greatness of giving a get al Tanai and on Erev Yom Kippur, that if she dies, then he was never married to her. The get is chal lemafreya, which means he's only married to the first one. And since he's left with one wife, meaning the first wife, everything is fine. And he's kosher as a Kohen Gadol. Now let's raise another possibility. We have to consider the possibility that neither wife would die, and that was the Gemara's kasha. He's left with two wives, which he can't have shnei batim. If, on the other hand, the first wife dies, then if the first wife dies, then we have to make sure that the get to the second wife is not valid. And if she remains alive in the Gemara scenario now, formulating that tonight of Im Tamusi, so she didn't die, she's alive, first wife died, he's married to the second one. But there's a possibility that the second wife will die. And if that be the case, when is the get chal? If it's chal only when she dies, then he was married for the bulk of Yom Kippur to two wives. But if it will be chal mafreya, then he was only married to the first one. And again, the whole predicate of the Gemara is that misav shteim is lo shchichi. We're not worried about the possible scenario of both wives dying. So there are possibilities of either the first wife dying and he's left with the second wife dying, and he's left with the first wife, or the possibility that neither of the two will die. So the Gemara asks the following, raises the following refutation to refute. V'dilma lo maisi b'habile shnei batim. Maybe neither of his two wives will die. So what good was it that you gave your second wife a get im tamusi? Because now, in effect, since there's a possibility that she won't die, then, right, because the get is only chal on the condition that she dies. It will not be chal on the condition that she survives. Well, if she survives, then he's married to two wives. Ella, but rather we have to reformulate, and this is going to go on and on and on. Gemara is going to play with so many different possible tanoim conditions in giving the get, and each one raise a refutation. Ela di Amrullah, hareza gitech almanas shelo tamusi. Not tamusi, but shelo tamusi. So the get is valid if she doesn't die. And that's going to cover the possibility that the first wife didn't die. And if the second wife is alive and well, then the get is valid. So he's only married to the first wife. So the Gemara actually fleshes this out. The Gemara says, Ilom misa maisa, if she doesn't die, and let's assume neither of the two wives die. So Megarshale, now the get is chal, because the get was on the condition shelo tamusi. And she's alive and well. So the get is chal. It's therefore, at this point, he's only married to one wife, because since she didn't die, therefore, Almanash shelo tamusi, the get is chal. So if the get is chal, he's only married to the first one. Oh, fi ma'isa ha, right? But let's say this second wife does die, then this is great. Why? Because he didn't give a divorce to his first wife, and now on the tzad that his second wife died, to get his chal to the second wife, well, that's fine. Kaimahach. He's got his first wife. He doesn't have his second. Gemara says you haven't covered all your bases in that case as well. Why? Dilma, hilo maisa. Maybe the second wife will not die. And again, the Tanai was shalotamusi, and the get therefore is chal. Favile gita dahach gita, the get to the second wife in the event that she doesn't die, the condition was fulfilled. But umaisi chaverta, even though the second wife didn't die, the first wife died. In which case, he's not married to either of the two wives. Come lay below bias. So that can't be a solution. El Gemara offers another possibility. The Omar law, he says to the second wife, Almanas shetamus achas mikeh. I'm giving you this get on the condition that one of the two wives die. This seems like a brilliant solution to that problem. Why? Because Maisa ha kaimahach, right? So he says Almanash tamus achas mikem. So now the second wife died. Wonderful. To get his chal, it's valid. And the first wife didn't die. Because again, keep in mind, we're not chosh that both of them will die. So he only has one wife. Maisa hach, if the first wife died, then ha kaima ha. Then the get is not valid to the second wife because the get was to the second wife of Menashe Tamus Achas Migi. Wait a second. There's something missing here in the puzzle. Because if he said Almanas Shetamus Achas Miken, Dilmolo Maisa, Lo Chadaminai. What if neither of them died? Remember, that was one of the three possible scenarios that we have to consider. Now, if neither of them die, so then the get is not valid because the get was only given, I'll tonight that one of them will die. Well, guess what? No one died. So in that case, the get is not valid. So he's married to two wives. The ode furthermore, is this really a valid get? Meaning, is this t'nai a t'nai that can be fulfilled, or I should say can fulfill the requirements of Hilchus T'noim, right? We have many different complicated laws and regulations that govern T'noim. And Omar Rava says in one of those conditions for a t'nai, a condition for a condition, Hareza Git, Omar Rava, if a man says to his wife, Hareza Gitech, Almanas Shalo Tishti Yayin, Kol Yemei Chayai, B'Chayaychi, you should abstain from the drinking of wine all the days of my life or all the days of your life. Ein zeh krisus. That's not a get. Why? Only if you say Kol Yemei Chai Ploni Harei zeh gitech. That would be a valid get, but not if you put it in either terms of the Baal or the. So what Rava derives from the word krisus that the Torah uses in Parshas Eitzeh is that there's got to be some point in the person's life when we can establish krisus. But if you set up a t'nai that continues and the t'nai cannot be fulfilled during one's lifetime, that doesn't sever, that's not krisus, the relationship between the Baal and the Miskareshes. And here too, in your scenario, where he set up a t'nai of Almanash Tamus, that t'nai can only be fulfilled at the point of death. That doesn't qualify as a valid t'nai to set up a get that's valid in krisus. And here, the whole purpose of our goal to achieve a get is not going to be achieved. And therefore, the Gemara has to now go back to the drawing board and come up with a different formulation of a get that will solve our problem. Ela diomar lo harezek itech almanas shalotamus chavertach. On the condition that the first wife will not die. And the Gemara says, look what we'll gain in that case. Ilo Maisa Chaverta. It means that I'm giving you this get as a valid get if she doesn't die. Well, if she didn't die, then the get is valid. So he's married to the first wife and not to the second one. If, on the other hand, the second wife dies, then the condition of this get has been fulfilled. And therefore, now he's divorced from his second wife and he's married to his first wife. So if the second wife dies, that fulfills a condition. The get is valid and he's no longer married to the second wife. He only has one wife. And therefore he can function as the Kohen Gadol. So just to reiterate that last point, Almanah Shalo Tamusi Chavertech, if the first wife, Baruch Hashem, survives it through Yom Kippur, then the get to the second wife has been fulfilled. The condition has been fulfilled, Lo Tamutzi. And it's like a condition on someone else. Anyway, therefore, he's only married to one wife. The Gemara says, Vidilma, but perhaps, Maisa Chaverta, Vipalga de Avoda. Now the Gemara throws in another element into the equation, and that is that maybe the first wife will die midway through the avoda. Now, if that happens, then igloi milsa lemafreya, and here we turn to Daf Yud Gimel and Beis, the gita deha lav gita, that to get to the second wife was not valid. And why is that? Because the condition was shalot tamus chaverta. Now, misas chaverta, that's going to torpedo the validity of the get. And if that be the case, then avid le'avoda b'shtei batin, which means that up until the moment that his wife died, he was actually married to two wives. Once she dies, he's only married to the second wife. But with the death of the first wife, we have a kiyum atnai of shalot tamus chavertech. And now he is not a kiyum atnai, I should say a bittul atnai, I meant to say, sorry. A bittul atnai of shalot tamus chavertech, which now which now undermines the get. There's a double negative here. So if it undermines the get, then he's married to the second wife. And although from the point at which his first wife died and on, he's okay, he's kosher because he's only married to the second wife, the first wife is dead. But nevertheless, since there is now a bittul atnai, therefore, he is married to the second wife from the time that he married her, which was on Erev Yom Kippur, and he was married at that point to two wives. And again, the reason why this get is torpedoed and invalidated is because the Tanai was Amanah Shalo Tamus Chaverta. And it's only if the first wife survives that the get is going to be valid. If in event that she dies, now again, if she dies, the Gemara dramatizes it because if she dies midway through the avoda, he's already started the avoda, then that becomes an invalid avoda because the moment that his first wife dies, the get to the second wife is invalidated because the kiyum atnai was shalot tamus chaverta, and to our surprise, she died. So then there was no kiyum atnai. He's married to the second wife, and that means Lamafreya from the time of Erev Yom Kippur he's married to her, and he was married to two wives up until the moment that his first wife died.